Hi, I'm Peter Slen, host of C-SPAN's Q&A program. Q&A is where we spend an hour every week talking with authors, historians, and others who add context to today's news. This week, we'll introduce you to Freeman Hrabowski. He served as president of the University of Maryland, Baltimore County for 30 years, an unusually long tenure for a college president. Calling himself a proud nerd, President Hrabowski strengthened the STEM programs at UMBC while overseeing 14,000 students, 4,000 employees, and a $500 million budget. In this episode, we'll talk with him about his book, The Resilient University, his views on the unrest on today's campuses, and the value of a college education in today's information-saturated world. Our conversation begins in just a moment.
Hi, it's Kayla from C-SPAN. Imagine 45 years ago when there was just a handful of television networks. C-SPAN first went on the air bringing an unfiltered view of government directly to America's living rooms. No spin, no commentary, just pure democracy in action.
And it's Greta from C-SPAN. It was a bold experiment. We finally had a front row seat to Congress, the White House, and the campaign trail, all without government funding.
As we celebrate 45 years and a legacy of unfiltered access, we ask for your support of a donation in honor of our 4 decades of service. Your gift, no matter how big or small, will help maintain this vital resource for access to the democratic process.
You can help ensure another 45 years of witnessing history unfold and empowering citizens to be informed and engaged in the political process. Visit cspan.org/donate today and join our 45th anniversary campaign.
Thank you for supporting C-SPAN, your unfiltered view of government. Visit cspan.org/donate today to make your gift of support. Thank you.
Freeman Hrabowski is the author of this book, The Resilient University. He was president of the University of Maryland, Baltimore County for 30 years, 1992 to 2022. President Hrabowski, in a minute, we're going to talk about the book. We're going to talk about the role of a college president. But first, I want to get your take on what's going on in the country on college campuses.
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question because it's on everybody's mind right now in the Middle East. And I say to colleagues all the time, the more we know about situations, the more we realize we need to reflect and think carefully about options and strategies. The less we know, the more quickly we want to jump and do something. And so we're going through a period now that's similar to other periods we've had. We went through the Vietnam War, for example. People had different points of view, a lot of student protests. We've gone through student protests before on many issues. There are 2 or 3 things that are really important. Number one, we need to educate our students and ourselves more about the issues of the Middle East. Vartan Gregorian, who was President Brown and then of the Carnegie, said one time that if there were one course he wishes every student could take, it would be comparative religion, because we would understand more about ways in which we are similar and ways in which we are different. And so my message to colleagues as I'm talking to them is there's no right side and the wrong side. There are these issues that are somewhere in the middle that we so quickly can judge people by something they say without knowing the full story. That for me, the number one goal is human life, saving lives. On either side, what do we do to help to save more lives and to prevent more lives from being taken, quite frankly? That means everything from supporting those hostages, praying for them. It also means not wanting to see more children killed on the other side. So I am of the strong belief we should be supporting our country and the president as he and his leaders are working to prevent the taking of more lives. And to me, that is most important. And I would ask Americans to be more willing to understand that any college president is working to do her best right now. And there's no win-win. They're just right now. It's a very challenging situation, but we all need to just calm down, reflect on the situation, learn more about the issues, and feel more for people on any side.
Did you ever face anything like this at UMBC?
Oh yeah. We have students from 100 countries, and people have different points of view involving the Middle East and other places. And the most important thing to do was to bring people together and have the difficult conversations, and to see if we could build trust among people, some trust that people want to do the right thing. There's no way to do that if people aren't talking to each other, and if we can't have a level of calmness. We had a saying at the time, we have to learn how to agree to disagree with some civility, to be able just to listen to the other point of view. We are so quick to suggest or to believe it's just my side or no side, and it's rarely like that. My grandmother, who had a 6th grade education, would say there's his side and her side and the real side. And the point is that usually the solutions are going to be somewhere in the gray area as we think about finding the common ground. We use that term a lot, but it's so true that when talking about the differences in our own country and differences in international issues, that we're going to need to find a way to listen carefully to the other side and to find out where the points where we can agree.
I want to read from a Wall Street Journal op-ed, a recent one from April. It may be premature to call the anti-Israel protests and assaults on Jewish students on campuses across the country a tipping point, but scenes that recall Lord of the Flies, where the university's best and brightest are behaving like barbarians, are prompting employers, parents, and high school students to rethink the value of their degrees.
You know, first of all, I think the college degree is more important now than ever. We need people who can think critically. The liberal arts broadly are more important than ever as we think about what it means to be a human being. And we should all be saying we are against anything that speaks of anti-Semitism. That is awful. It just is. Just as we should be saying we want to save lives of those Palestinian children. We have to do both. We really do. And we need to speak out against, whether it's racism or against a group of people. We have to speak out very clearly about that. But we also have to go beyond just speaking out against something. We have to understand the issues. And I know that many of those students who are protesting about a war in Palestine are not against Jewish people. There's a difference between being bothered by the leader of a country, and that person's approach to war, and versus being against the people of that country. Many people in Israel are not pleased with their leader right now. We know this. President Biden knows this. And so we have to make these distinctions, and we have to be clearer about what we truly believe. I am not willing to accept the idea that this country will condone anti-Semitism. No, there are those who are really wrong in saying that, and we have to say it. At the same time, I know that decent people don't want to see children on the other side and families killed. And we've got to get back to those fundamental human values as we talk about these things.
If this were happening at UMBC when you were president, how would you handle it?
Yes. And there are two things I would say. First, there's a wonderful president there, and so I'm very careful to keep a distinction that I'm president emeritus. I'm no longer there, and I'm talking with presidents around the country. But I would say what we always did, and what I see people on campuses doing around the country, in the most enlightened situations, is finding ways to bring people together to have the robust and difficult conversations. The challenge is that when you're in the midst of the heated protest and you're in the midst of negotiations, the emotions can be rising so much, and it's so heated, you don't get to reason and the way to deal with things. And that's a part of what some campuses are dealing right now. And they're going to need the time to get things to calm down some. And some demands just will not be met. But at the same time, others can be, at least in terms of making sure we're keeping people safe, right? I mean, when you have Jewish students who are not feeling safe right now, but when we have Palestinian kids or people who are supporting the Palestinian cause, who are saying we need to stop this war. We need to protect human beings. And I think there's a way to do that. I would say, and I'm a strong believer in the right of Americans to protest peacefully. Peacefully. We get into mistakes and problems when it's no longer peaceful. That is the point. We want to make the point that we want to support our president in helping that country to stop the war. I mean, I understand we've got to deal with issues about the hostages for sure, and we have to deal with safety of people on both sides. But as we protest, we must do so peacefully. And as presidents are dealing with these issues, the first thing they have to do is to work on the safety of their students. That's the point. You want to make sure people are safe. And one of the things people don't say enough is that sometimes when you have these student protests on any campus, some of the people protesting are not students and they have their own agenda. And that can be worrisome to people. I heard the dean of journalism at Columbia saying that. I know the president of Columbia is concerned about the safety of her students. And people are angry right now. But people are angry on both sides. People are very angry. It's easy to criticize that leader. The best the leader can do is to remain calm, to listen to the different perspectives, to work to do the right thing based on listening to these people, and to give the situation the time to calm down some so we can have more conversations. And once we get to that, then we need to have more of those challenging conversations. I read a piece just in the last 24 hours that was saying there's not the intellectual rigor to the conversations. It's not just them or us. We need to understand the issues. And that's why college education is more important than ever, and a college education that teaches people to listen to the other side. That it's not just one point of view. We've got these different points of view that must be taken into account.
Well, Speaker Mike Johnson visited Columbia.
Yes.
Let's listen and get your reaction.
We just can't allow this kind of hatred and anti-Semitism to flourish on our campuses, and it must be stopped in its tracks. Those who are perpetrating this violence should be arrested. And I'm here today joining my colleagues and calling on President Shafiq to resign if she cannot immediately bring order to this chaos. If this is not contained quickly, and if these threats and intimidation are not stopped, there is an appropriate time for the National Guard. We have to bring order to these campuses. We cannot allow this to happen around the country. We are better than this.
Speaker of the House.
Yes. My first statement, we must take the politics out of education. We must not be driven by political comments. We must be driven by moral principles. First, calming down. I am always bothered when people quickly call for the resignation of a president, of a leader, when the leader is working to do the right thing as much as possible. Number one. Number two, really important, we have to separate the issues and think about them. Violence, no. We cannot have the violence. We must make sure people are safe. It's very true. Whatever we need to do to keep people safe. And violence is wrong. We cannot have the protests become violent. When they do, we have a problem because that's the safety of people. God forbid, we don't want people killed in the midst of a protest. Number three, we must look at, again, the complexity of the issues. It is perfectly legitimate for Americans to say, we agree with you, President Biden. We need to do everything possible to stop this war and to stop the killing of children. We understand the need to protect those hostages and to do whatever we can. And there's got to be some diplomacy used to do that. But right now, as these young people are showing and others, people are worried about the thousands and thousands of people being killed through a war that just means a lot of bums. And the fact is that I am a strong believer that we have to support a country's leader like America right now, as President Biden and his people are working to work with Israel. I'm also a strong believer that we need to look at how the Israeli people are talking about their leader and how they're worried about that. And the hostages on the one hand, but the approach they're using. So there are these distinctions that must be made. Because you're concerned about the Palestinian children does not in any way suggest that you are against Jewish people or against the Israeli people, while you might be against this leader and the approach that person is taking. But when we're in the middle of big arguments and heated protests, things just get jumbled and you're on one side or another, and that is not the point. That's why higher education is so important. So we can take the time to understand the issues with some depth. That's what we need, not the quick answers, not the quick speeches that say do this, do that, but rather let's figure this thing out together.
Well, let's turn our attention to your book, The Resilient University, and I want to start with a quote from it.
Yes.
Elected officials and political candidates have made into political issues college costs, tuition-free college, student debt, the content of education, American history, critical race theory, workplace skills, and free speech on campus, controversial speakers. This is a double-edged sword.
Yes.
What do you mean by double-edged sword?
Yes, sure. On the one hand, we must have freedom of speech. It's true. People need to be able to say what they think. It's one of our rights as an American, as Americans. On the other hand, when the speech becomes that which creates violence, or when it becomes anti-Semitism, and all of a sudden we see the violence, we have to do something about it. That's the first point. But the second point is that we make sweeping generalizations about the cost of college and without understanding the specificity. There are many institutions that have worked very hard to keep costs down. We should talk more about our community colleges and the job they do, more about public institutions and private institutions that have discounting, right? And most important, we need to see how much education transforms lives. Show me a family that's had success with college in terms of their kids, for example, that will not want the grandkids going to college. The challenge we face is that only about a third of Americans have four-year college degrees. And we have millions of Americans who started college, unfortunately, and for whatever reasons did not graduate, and they have a lot of bills, so they don't feel good about it. And then all the others, the literally 60+% of Americans who've not had the college experience, who don't know what it might do for their kids. And that's not just about finding a job. When we look at all the statistics on what happens to college graduates and their lives and the way they can participate meaningfully in our society, we see why colleges are so important. Find me, though, that family that's had success that won't say others deserve to have that right too, whether it is a 2-year or a 4-year experience. The important thing is post-secondary education. It's why we are as advanced as we are as a society right now, not just in the STEM areas and technology, but when thinking about the role America plays in the world. It's because we have all of these educated people that we've inspired other countries to want their children to be educated. The challenge we face right now, as I talk about, and my colleagues and I have got wonderful colleagues who are co-authors of this book, from a provost to a vice president for finance to a senior leader on our campus. All three of them, we talked with people throughout the campus, and I work with people around the country. And what we saw was this, in terms of the Resilient University in the book, was this idea that we all get knocked down as a society, as people, as universities, but we have to be with the kind of flexibility to get back up and to say what else must we do if we're going to take the institution to the next level. And most important, to put students first, the success of students at the core of whatever we're trying to do.
Freeman Hrabowski, what's a definition of a successful college education?
Sure. To be educated is to be ready to learn and to grow and to develop. I'm over 70 years old and I'm studying French. You know, je parle français avec mes étudiants tous les jours. When I started several years ago, my students laughed at me, and I said, "What? Why are you laughing?" And they said, "Doc, don't you think you're kind of old?" No, we're never too old to learn. It was Beckett, the Irish poet who spoke in French, who wrote in French, who said in one of his books, the character was studying the dancing of bees. And when bees are dancing, they're communicating. And this character said, here's something I could study all my life and never understand. But he said it with great rapture. He was fascinated because the more he studied the dancing of the bees and the more he began to understand how they communicated, the more he realized there was so much more to know. The essence of education is developing the wisdom to know I can learn, I've learned some things, but there's so much more to learn. And to have that lust for learning, to be grounded in the notion that the humanities will always matter, because it's always about behavior of people, the arts, the social sciences. And yes, I'm a mathematician. I get goosebumps during math, but my mother, the English teacher in math, always said, but at the core will be the humanities. And so being a broadly educated person means being able to think about the different perspectives, being able to think about other points of view, looking for not just information, but trying to gather from the information, to gain from the data, what's significant that can make a difference in our understanding how to solve the problem. And to know quick answers are not the way. No, that we have to take the time to think carefully and critically about these issues, about our country, about international matters. I would say to Americans, and the book is a perfect example about getting back up, that we're divided right now, but this is where history comes in. We've been divided before, but we can't lose 40% of Americans on any side. We have to pull together to figure out, okay, what have we learned as a country that has allowed us to deal with all the challenges we face, and yet somehow we finally come to the point of the common ground. That's the beauty of America, that we do finally. Right now, we're in the midst of the division. But when I was in college, we were in the midst of the division. We really were. When I graduated, it was, will we ever be better than this? And yet, we think about legislation that came about. We think about the Civil Rights Act, the Higher Education Act, and we became better. And we will do it again. That's the point, that resilience, the resilient, that we can be better than we are today.
So you graduated from undergrad in 1972?
In 1970.
1970.
I was 19.
You graduated early.
Yep.
Where'd you go to school, and were you involved in some of the protests of the 60s?
I went to my beloved Hampton as undergrad, and my girlfriend and I studied. Now my wife of more than 50 years, Jackie, and I studied in Egypt as exchange students, and we learned a lot about Islam and Arab society, and we learned a great deal of respect. All right. And then in subsequent years, then we went on to grad school at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and had an amazing experience, and have spent quite a bit of time in Israel. And so we've been talking about the Middle East situation for more than 50 years. And again, the more we learn and the more we understand from both points of view, the more we realize there's a lot more to understand. And we see how Americans don't fully appreciate the role of religion in those societies, and the history of both sides, and the ways in which we need to be supportive of bringing people together.
University of North Carolina has started a democracy initiative.
Yes.
Is that important?
Yes. Oh, it's very important. And by the way, and as a mathematician, I always go back to the last problem in question, and I didn't fully answer your question because I was involved in protests. I grew up in protests. I was a child leader in the civil rights movement. I went to jail and with kids under Dr. King. And so I understand the importance of activism, but a peaceful protest, all right? And then I was involved in protests at Hampton and was very close to the president of Hampton, who went on to be the ambassador to Sweden, Jerome Holland. But the fact is that, I do understand how sometimes we have to speak out and speak truth to power. We do, to get people to think about what's important to the people. But the idea of a Center for Democracy, we have that kind of center at UMBC on democracy and have had it for some years. And what's important about it is to get people to think about what Thoreau called the whole vote. The whole vote. That yes, we want to think about the policies that different candidates are promoting, but it's not just about going to the ballot and voting. It's about much more than that. It's about educating people about the issues all year long, you see, so that by the time it is time to vote, people know two things. One, my vote matters. And number two, and even more important, I understand the implications of voting for different people, the implications or the impact of my decision on what happens to human beings. Very important.
You were president of UMBC before social media and as it grew up.
Yes.
How has it changed teaching, college life?
Now we expect answers from leaders like that. in the early 90s, in 92, I had the first a cell phone that I could put in my pocket on the campus. If you can imagine, in 92. And people would see this big, is that the phone? Is that the phone, right? People younger have no idea that, people didn't go around with phones. We thought of a phone as something with a cord to it, right? So when you think about that in terms of technology, and on a campus where half of our students are more in science and tech, and I would say this, it's very interesting that our mindset right now as leaders is we've got to get back to people. People are waiting for a response. Before, you'd get a letter that had been typed, and within several days, you'd send something back. Now, no, people expect answers not just within 24 hours, but they expect presidents to respond when issues in the country come up as never before. And one of the points I often make is, yeah, you can get a quick response out, but does that response reflect the careful thinking and listening involved in hearing different perspectives? One of our challenges in our society right now is to understand we have to be more deliberate in thinking through the response we give, and that response often doesn't reflect the depth it should, because people expect a quick response that's said in a few words. And that is a part of, we're going through this extreme period right now where people expect like this. I think as time goes on, we're going to bounce back from this and say, let's be a bit more careful. I was speaking to students for a commencement, preparing for a commencement at a college, and I said, what would you like me to talk about? And one of the students said this, you read social media, Doc, and you can't help but be depressed. We're going to hell as a society. So what can you tell us? And I said, well, I hope I'm going to tell you something more than you're going to be going to hell that is that bad. I have to be able to tell you, let's know the history of human beings, the history of our country. We've been through periods before and we get back up. Well, the social media can present usually the breaking news, and usually the breaking news is the most negative stuff of all. And it is a time when we have challenges. I'm not trying to sugarcoat things, but I'm saying if we only focus on the negative side, then we just keep going down a dark hole. We must look for the hope. We must look at people and believe, even if we disagree, we have some things in common. We believe in our country. Most people believe we want people to be safe. We don't want children killed. We want people to learn to read. So we have to go to those points of optimism, of hope, and say, what can we do to make it better? That tomorrow can be better than today, as Dr. King told me as a kid, as all of us, but we have to make it so. And it's not just about the one person. And one of the points in one of my books, and we say this here, it's not just about the leader, it's about all of us in a collective way saying we are a part of the solution or we're part of the problem.
One of your previous books, The Empowered University, how is that different from the Resilient
Sure. The Resilient University builds on the Empowered University. Empowered to do what? Empowered as a university, as a society, as individuals, to look in the mirror and to be honest. What do we do well? And where do we need to improve? We need to be willing to say success is never found. There's much more work for every university to do, and for a country, and for people. We have to know we can be better than we are, you see. And so the Empowered University focused on how we go about helping people to appreciate the fact there's a role they can play. And the Resilient University came after COVID, when universities in our society were knocked down, and we were in the middle of political divisions of all types, and race issues, and George Floyd, and all of that. And the fact was we needed to bounce back. And we need to do that now, to understand, to make education more effective, to look at the ways in which we can use technology, to look at the gap between those who have and those who don't, to understand more about our role in the global society, and to understand how we can make politics in our country more collaborative, I would say. That it doesn't have to be, I'm against you and you're my enemy. If we are Americans, there have to be ways in which we can pull people together. And there are people who are bipartisan who want to do that. And we need that now, but we need elected officials who want that also. And the Resilient University speaks to that issue of the ways in which, by having a vision for who we want to be, and by moving through that vision to actions that speak of hope and of the passion and courage to do the right thing, even when it's not popular. So what we talk about in this book, The Resilient University, Purpose and Inclusion, is exactly what we need to be talking about when thinking about our society, that it is so important that we believe in ourselves and to believe we can be better than this.
Well, let's go back to the Resilient University.
Yes.
Quote, higher education matters.
Yes.
While graduates still report positive college experiences, the U.S. population in general is reporting declining approval for higher education.
Right.
Why is that?
And it's because we look at the broad side. The fact is that most Americans have not had the experience with higher education. All they do is hear what elected officials sometimes say and what the media will say. Higher education, does it really matter? And I'm always saying, let's look at who is in Congress. Let's look at who the elected officials are. Let's look at the media people. Most have college degrees. They've gotten their jobs as a result of their education. When you look at the general population, most people don't have a college degree. They don't know the experience, but they hear their leaders sometimes saying these days, does it really matter? Of course it matters. And not just to get a job. It does help with the financial side, but there's so much more. I mean, I am a strong believer a person's life is richer when that person can read and think and write and communicate effectively, when that person can think through issues as a result of having had certain experiences in the educational world. And those involve analyzing problems, learning how to listen critically, learning how to speak carefully and clearly. My mother would always say that good writing reflects good thinking. Clear writing reflects clear thinking. You can't write well if you don't think well. We need an emphasis on the power of the brain, quite frankly, of the brain and the heart, I would say. That comes from studying the arts and humanities and the social sciences. It helps us to hone our skills and our ability to see things differently. Very important.
Okay, Mom has come up twice so far in our conversation.
Yes.
Tell us about her.
Yeah. Mother was an amazing mother and father, a great father too. They were educators, and all of their lives, they haven't come out of poverty in rural Alabama, and I grew up in Birmingham. They spent their lives in different ways teaching. Even when my father left teaching, he worked in a steel mill, but he still worked with the men of color, black men, in preparing them for the GED, getting them ready, and sending them to my mother, who worked at night on math and English for the GED. Where education makes the difference. Just so true. And that's the message of higher education. Education makes the difference somehow. And higher education really makes a difference. And I'm not arguing that every person needs a liberal arts degree. I am saying post-secondary education. But quite frankly, the leaders in our country are typically with that liberal education. And I'm challenging universities, as I do when I'm working with new presidents in the Harvard program. I'm saying we criticize Congress, but they're all our graduates. Almost all are our graduates. And so I'm saying there's more we need to do to help people learn how to work effectively and to think about those values like truth that should be more important than ever. So we in universities have work to do. We have prepared leaders, and some are wonderful and others are not. But the question of how do we emphasize truth and integrity in our country? Those are words that we use all the time, but we have to be able to chew on those words with some kind of meat that says this is really important to our society. Because in the final analysis, when we talk about the resilience and coming back up, the question is, who are we as a society, as universities, as a society? We should be someplace, an institution of university, a country that people can believe in, that they know when they say something, when their leaders speak, they speak the truth, that you can take it to the bank, what they say. We've got that challenge right now. I am biased in that I do think President Biden is a man of integrity. I really do. And that's now what I say on my campus, and what I was saying when I was president is, you have the right to vote for whomever you want. Let's just talk about it. So I'm not trying to say we just push one side. I'm saying we should be environments in which people can give their different points of view. And you can, as a student, disagree with me even as a president in what you say.
Well, one of your fellow college presidents, Derek Bach, you probably know him.
Yes.
Former Harvard president, there for years.
Yes.
New book out, Attacking the Elites.
Yes.
And he has a chapter called Are Faculties Too Liberal?
Yeah.
And he makes 3 arguments that yes, they are.
Yes.
The quality of conversation gets limited.
Yes.
There's an impact and effect on students.
Right.
And there's potential political intervention by politicians.
Sure. I have great respect for Derek Bach, and he does speak truth. And at the same time, I would add this, and this is what I said on my campus. We want students to hear all sides. We want people to be able to express things as they see them. People should not be intimidated and not able to say what they truly believe, because the unexamined life, as we say from philosophy, not worth living. The idea is clearly that you can't examine what you think or what you've been told if you can't put it on the table and look at it from different angles. And we do need more of that. We do need more of that on every side. And that while I may love one TV station or one approach, I need to hear the other one too, to understand what are they saying and why are they saying it. What part of it may have some truth that I need to hear? We can't just be one or the other. We've got to find ways to have the robust conversations on our campuses. And while some do it, many do not. He's right. And as I've said to young faculty sometimes, wonderful people who are passionate as they should be, but if you're so passionate that your students who think differently can't say what they really believe, you're not changing them at all. If we're going to have people looking at what is truth, we have to be able to examine whatever people think. It is true. We have to do that, and we do have to be willing to accept the fact that people will have different perspectives, very much so. I grew up in a place in Birmingham, in middle class Birmingham, and where we had everybody from Angela Davis to Condi Rice to me, and we all have mothers who were teachers. Angela's mother taught me, and my mother taught her, you see. And Condi's father was my high school counselor and my mentor. And we can have different points of view on different things, you see. Just did an interview with Condi, and I have the greatest respect for her, as I do for Angela Davis. And we agree on many things, and some things we may not, because that's what Americans should be able to do. That we can sometimes agree and sometimes not, and not become enemies as a result. And so going back to what Derek Bach is saying, the idea is, how do we allow people to be different in their thinking and to understand that the fundamental right of an American is to vote for whomever you think is best qualified. Let's just have the robust conversation. Let's talk about what are the values. What is it that's important? And based on that, people will make their decisions.
Freeman Hrabowski is University of Maryland, Baltimore County, part of the University of Maryland system.
Yes.
What was the impact a couple of years ago of March Madness on your school?
That's always a great question. UMBC is a nerdy place. We're very proud of that. We really are. We've been chess champions. We won mock trial against Yale several years ago. Large numbers go to grad school. And yet when we won the game, I want you to know I had many of my students who said, were very excited. And I got all kinds of, we were talked about in the papers in France. UMBC, as they say in French. And yet I had so many students who would also say, what's the significance, Doc? Why are people so excited? I said, well, it's because the one at the bottom, UMBC, athletically, number 16, beat the one at the top, right? That wonderful place, UVA. And everybody had been laughing at us. And it was such a big deal because we were the underdog and we succeeded. People respect the underdog. They root for the underdog. And when we won, by 20 points, just saying. It really did. And this is funny for me, because everybody knows I'm the mega nerd. When I go to games, people have to explain to me. I know math, all right? So people explain it to me, but I loved my students, and they were solid academic students. That's the part I want you to say here. Scholar athletes. And most important, though, out of our respect for the other campus. And we love saying, and I love the president of UVA of saying, and we inspired them to be number one the next year in the whole country, right? But that's the 2018 story. It is.
Well, a little bit about UMBC, 14,000 or so students, about 4,000 employees, over $500 million annual budget, Tuition, room, and board ranges from $20,000 to $40,000 a year.
Yes.
Can you break down that expense?
Sure. The $40,000 a year would be for students coming from out of state, and they get all types of financial aid. And most important,
So those are the list prices.
Those are the list prices.
How many people pay the list price?
Yeah, it would be a very small percentage paying the full amount because, first of all, we don't have large numbers from out of state. 10, 15% are from out of state. We are very international. 60% of the students there have undergrads, have a parent from another country. This Baltimore, Washington corridor, I mean, many of our families are military families. They're from diplomacy. They're from the intelligence community. And so it feels like the Plaza of Nations at the UN. And I'm very proud to say that as I go around, as I give credit to the new president and all the people who are there now. It took me a while to get in the habit of saying they, because it's always been we for so many years, but they are doing, a fine job. And what's important about that is that there is an emphasis on internships, research experiences, not just in the sciences and engineering, but also in the humanities and social sciences, and people get involved in Annapolis and in Washington and working for arts institutions and connecting disciplines. And it's similarly for the University System of Maryland. The fact is that I know that entire system of campuses, people are involved in keeping costs reasonable and of getting them involved in internships so people can have jobs. If there were one message I would give to families is the worst thing a student can do from my perspective, is to just study, which is what we want them to do, but not think about the world and getting involved in service, for example, community service, and getting involved in jobs. Because it's the involvement in helping students or children or helping senior citizens or working at any of the agencies, for example, that will lead to great experiences and jobs or grad school after college. It's very important. And if you've not had any work experience, and you graduate, you really do think you're going to be CEO very quickly. And you think you can have the same habits you had in college, and you cannot. So people, we need to knock down the walls, the boundaries. And I know the campuses of the University System of Maryland work on that. Knock down the boundaries, just as at UMBC. Knock down the boundaries, get people into workplaces, nonprofit, for-profit, corporate, and also bring people to campus so we know how to interact with all kinds of people.
Break down that cost. $20,000. Yes. Where does that money go?
Tuition and fees, room and board. And that's, when you're talking about tuition, fees, and room and board, it's going to be mid-20s for both. But that's somebody that we say we feed them. We feed them and we give them that. And that has everything to do with the expensive nature of the education. Our students have substantive research experiences on that campus. 40% of the students in a number of majors go immediately to grad school with fellowships. In many cases, around the country. We are the leading producer of African Americans who go on to get PhDs in science and engineering and MD PhDs. And we are perhaps 20% Black. The largest minority group on that campus is Asian American, from parents from all over the world. But the costs have everything to do with the quality of the education. A first-rate faculty, number one, first rate with many publications, and more important for the undergraduate, great teaching, but the research is a part of the teaching. We've got, whether people are in political science and writing on democracy, or they're in biochemistry and solving problems involving HIV. They are well informed because of their own research, and they care about students, including not just the PhD students and undergrads. We were very proud to become Research One. So the research is first rate. The teaching, and we are often seen in top group of innovative campuses, all right? These students are getting a superb education. And I would say that for that University System of Maryland, that the campuses really focus on that, the quality, and on the interest in making sure when they graduate, they have a preparation to go to grad school, med school, law school, or to get a good job. And this card is amazing for that, as you know, between Baltimore, Virginia, up to New York. A lot of jobs in that area.
This is a three-part question, Freeman Hrabowski.
Yes.
What's the role of a college president?
Yes.
The board of trustees?
Yes.
And large donors?
Sure. So I gave a talk recently to the Association of Governing Boards, which includes universities and colleges, public and private. In the last month in Boston. And I talked about this role of the board. The board's responsibility has everything to do with setting policies and working with the chancellor of a system or with the campus itself, if it's just one campus, to ensure that we get a president who has the experience necessary to lead with moral and strong academic values. And so that board is responsible, as is the case in corporate America, for succession. More than anything, I serve on corporate boards too, and the same thing, the idea of making sure you have strong leadership who will lead and manage the campus. The board's responsibility is at the policy level, quite frankly, and to make sure that people are following those policies as the leader of the campus is doing the management and the inspiration, because part of the role of a president is to inspire people to believe that we can be better, to believe in ourselves as a young campus at UMBC. Yes, to believe in ourselves, to look at the strength of the faculty and the commitment of staff. I should say that the staff at a UMBC, very committed people, professionals who have at the center of their work that student, and most important, academic success. We are very academic, and that's a part of the message, even as we talk about the great role of sports in our society, to make sure that we are keeping the academics at the forefront, that we want students to think well and to learn how to work with other people. And you asked about the board, you asked about the president, and then you asked one more.
Donors.
Oh, donors.
Large donors.
We love large donors. I will mention three. Our Linehan Artist Scholars, after the artists, quite frankly, on our campus, and students to become artists. Number two, our Sherman Scholars. Betsy Sherman is very large donor for our campus. And the Sherman Scholars Program is designed to prepare teachers for challenging schools. What could be better? And they started with math and science, and now she and George and the late George, and now Betsy runs it, and with a foundation run by Josh Michael, who's a graduate of our school. The fact is that we are preparing teachers to work with kids who need so much support in inner cities, in challenging environments, from early childhood, particularly through middle school. We need to spend more time, and the Shermans really wanted to focus on that early childhood experience, because if you get that child early, you can build that foundation, not just in the reading and the math, but in getting a sense of self and helping teachers to appreciate the role they can play in all of that work, all right? But middle school, very important. One of the big challenges in America is that many middle school kids don't get the foundation they need, not just in the reading, but in the mathematics. It is a challenge in our society right now that's been exacerbated by COVID for children in that bottom 40% economically of our society of all backgrounds. And then I would say the one other donor I would mention is now 100 years old. And if I were doing anything, I'd be dedicating this interview both to Betsy Sherman because of what she's doing there, and then to Bob Meyerhoff. He and Rita Becker
Who is Bob Meyerhoff?
Bob Meyerhoff is a philanthropist, an MIT graduate, who started this program, the Meyerhoff program, leading program in the country for producing Black scientists, in a conversation with me that was wonderful. I was introduced to him by Bob Embry, president of the Abel Foundation, and from the first conversation with Bob Meyerhoff, and this is literally more than 35 years ago, at a time when I was in my 30s and he was in his 60s, and we began the conversation with his asking, what can I do to help more Black males succeed in our society? He said, I'm already working, at the time his wife Jane, and I'm already working on some issues involving women, and they were funding things at Goucher College, his wife's alma mater. He said, but everything I read on Black males is negative if it's not about sports. What can we do? And we were working at the same time to figure out what can we do to help more Blacks and minorities succeed in science at UMBC. We married the two ideas. So he is the co-founder of that program, and most important, has been asking good questions for more than 35 years. It's a great story, it really is. And so I place those up to you as wonderful donors of a young campus, the Sherman Scholars, the Linehan Scholars, the Meyerhoff scholars. I mean, when you hear that name Meyerhoff, you think about great science. And one of those Meyerhoff scholars, quite frankly, became the first Black woman to create a vaccine. She worked with Bonnie Graham. They co-led the team at NIH to produce the Moderna vaccine.
And what is her name?
Her name is Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett.
Let's watch a little bit of video.
Oh.
I often describe myself as a viral immunologist, which is just a fancy way of saying that I study the immune system's responses to viruses. I more specifically use my viral immunology expertise to inform the development of vaccines and therapeutics for coronaviruses and other viruses with pandemic potential. Most notable of my 17 years of experience is that in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, my team and I at the National Institutes of Health co-developed both a leading COVID-19 vaccine and therapeutic antibodies.
A young woman who grew up in rural North Carolina. We recruited her at 17. She's now in the faculty at Harvard. It's a wonderful story about the power of education to transform lives.
Was she a Meyerhoff scholar?
She was a Meyerhoff scholar. She was an M17, meaning the 17th class of the Meyerhoffs. Yes.
Freeman Hrabowski, can large donors have outsized influence? I'm thinking Bill Ackman, Harvard, Claudine Gay.
You know, of course they can. The ideal situation is for the donors, like Bob Meyerhoff, Betsy Sherman, to want to know more about what goes on, to want to be supportive of campuses as they work on the projects that they're funding, quite frankly, but to respect the expertise of the educators to make final decisions. It's perfectly okay for any donor to raise questions of any kind and to do so in a respectful way. But the real question is, who is it that has the real expertise? We would not try to tell a neurosurgeon how to go about the operation. One of my leading Meyerhoffs is now a full professor in neuroscience and psychiatry at Duke, Dr. Khafre Zarasa, who comes out of the Montgomery County Schools, and he's full professor, Howard Hughes investigator, member of the National Academy of Medicine, and he's in his 40s. It's unbelievable. Nobody would ever try to tell him how to work on the problems involving the brain. You see? You know, and the same thing. People think that education is where they have expertise because we all graduated from high school and college. It's just not true. There is something called expertise in this world of education, and we need to respect people. It's fine to ask questions and to make suggestions, but never should people have the kind of influence that says you have to do what I tell you to do. No.
In your book, The Resilient University, you report on graduation rates,
Yes.
and these are for 6 years.
Yes.
Hispanic students, 20% success. Black students, 28% graduate within 6 years. White students, 41%. Asian students, 61%. On top of that, you mentioned earlier, a third
Yes.
of Americans go on to get advanced degrees.
Yes.
Why are those
Sure.
disparate?
You need to know, first of all, that as a stat person, I'm loving the fact that you're using statistics. You've got something incorrect. Let me say this. The National Academy of Sciences study that I chaired showed that only 20% of Blacks and Hispanics who start in a major in science and engineering will graduate with a major in science and engineering, in natural sciences and engineering. Similarly, only a third of whites will graduate, and only 41% of Asians graduate with a major in natural sciences and engineering. They may graduate. Now, the graduation rates on our campus at UMBC, you'd see there's no difference between Blacks and whites and Asians. It's all a 6-year graduation rate, 70-some%, over 70%. But the issue you're talking about is that many students do leave, of all races, do leave STEM within the first year or two. In fact, we still call.
Oh, so these are STEM,
natural science and engineering, and for the country. Yes. It came, we have it in the book, but it's for the country from the work I did as chair of the National Academy of Sciences Committee on Underrepresentation in STEM. It is a major issue, not just for minorities, though. The majority of students who start in natural sciences and engineering in colleges and universities don't succeed in those areas. They change their majors. I often will say to groups, how many of you started off wanting to be a doctor and you ended up becoming a lawyer? All right? It happens so often. And what happens is students don't do well in the chemistry, for example. Why is this? If you're in the social sciences and you can read fairly well and you work hard, you can get a B. In most cases, you can get a B if you do your homework. That's the problems, the questions or questions you've seen before. And you may not be the best thinker, but you're a solid thinker and you can get a B. But in a math class, for example, I give you a test with 5 problems. 3 of the problems you've seen before, you've worked hard and you get them. 2 of the problems I've changed around. And all of a sudden you say, oh my God, I haven't seen this. And before you know it, you don't get those 2 in the time and you get a D. And that kind of thing happens. The unpredictability of performance in STEM happens all the time. And that's why my TED Talk focuses on this need for collaboration among students and the idea of the expectations we have, not just for students, but for our colleagues, for ourselves. You know, if I put a math problem on the board and I give you, the class, a test on that problem, and nobody is able to solve the problem, did I teach the concept? You see, I would argue no, I've not taught it. That somehow the people didn't catch the concept. They didn't grab it somehow. Yet we tend to think too often in our society and beyond that if you put it on the board, you've taught it. So if most people fail it, and in many cases, 60-70% of students fail tests in STEM areas regularly. And yet there's not this sense of guilt or responsibility saying, I've got to do more to get the students either to work harder or to work in a group. And the big issue I would say is that and this is the work that I've done with the National Academy of Sciences and the National Academy of Engineering, focuses on how we get more students, Americans, to succeed in those disciplines.
And what is that path to success?
Sure. It's what we talk about in the Mile program and what I say in my TED Talk. It's having higher expectations for ourselves that we can have many more students succeeding. The National Science Foundation would say it's trying to work to get more students to succeed in the first year work. What people tend to think is if people don't make it well, it wasn't for them. Because in our society, we tend to think that each person is either a math science type or they are history, English, and arts type. By the time they get to college, they already know. They're thinking one way or the other. That's just not how it has to be. We are learning that more people can be in technology than we thought. You can have a major in English and still have great background in technology and do something that combines the areas or our areas in imaging and digital arts, you see. So we have to stop thinking that people are math science types or history English types, that they can learn both. And we have to stop thinking, well, you've got to be really smart to do the math and science, or you're this quiet person on the side who does math and science. No. There are other societies where it's just expected that everyone will succeed in those disciplines. The person may not want to be a mathematician or scientist, but there's a level of math one can learn. We all need to learn statistics. If you ask most Americans if they like math, they laugh. Whenever I ask that question, educated groups, they will laugh and they will say, how do you put math and like in the same sentence? Well, I'm this Pied Piper for people in math and science. I'm saying, no, it's not just about minorities and just about women in general. We want more people appreciating what math and science can do connected to humanities and social sciences.
30 years at UMBC.
Yes.
What do you take pride in?
What I take pride in more than anything else would be our students and our faculty and how and the staff who've been developed over the years, because any university should be a learning institution, a place where not just the students, but faculty and staff are learning all the time. And I take great pride in all of the people there who have been there, some have left and gone other places, and who are doing so well. When I tell you, I was at Duke, and I could point to 4 that I saw that day, faculty members, some already tenured in medicine and engineering. When I think about today, this morning, coming here, a young man calling me to say he's just become full professor in engineering at Clemson, and that president of Clemson is a UMBC graduate with 3 degrees, or the head of North American philanthropy for J.P. Morgan is a young woman who grew up in inner city Baltimore, went to a trade school, came on to UMBC as a little valedictorian, becomes a lawyer, Alicia Wilson, and then works at Hopkins as a vice president, and is now at JP Morgan over philanthropy for North America. I mean, you can't help but think the Speaker of the House of Maryland is a psychology graduate of UMBC. First woman head of the House of Delegates, first Black, who works with all kinds of people and is amazingly effective, you see. So the point I'm making is, for any educator, the legacy has to be the students. My mother always said, teachers touch eternity through their students.
Freeman Hrabowski, 30 years as president of University of Maryland, Baltimore County, the author of this book, The Resilient University. We appreciate your time here on C-SPAN.
The last chapter is on hope. And I always end by saying, it sounds trite, but keep hope alive. We must keep the hope.
All Q&A programs are available on our website or as a podcast on our C-SPAN Now app.